This What's Working with Cam Marston podcast is brought to you courtesy of Michelob Ultra Beer.
They say consistency is the key to success. They weren't wrong. So how about grabbing a beer that's consistently smooth, consistently refreshing, and consistently light? You might just find that the road to success can be pretty enjoyable. Michelob Ultra, the perfect balance of taste and refreshment, and only 2.6 carbs and 95 calories. It's only worth it if you enjoy it. Enjoy responsibly. Anheuser-Busch Michelob Ultra Light Beer, St. Louis, Missouri.
All right, here we go. Welcome to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston. What's Working is the radio show and podcast featuring the workplace, the workforce, and the marketplace trends shaping the workplace, the workforce, and the marketplace around us. My goal is to get content out of my guests that will help you become a little bit better at whatever it is that you do and maybe help me along the way. That's the goal. Anyway, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're along for the ride. I hope this is helpful and pleasant and enjoyable for you. What's Working is brought to you by the Alabama Center for Real Estate, housed in the Culverhouse College of Business, all housed at the University of Alabama. Again, welcome. First thing I want to do is let you know where to find more information on this show before I talk to you about today's upcoming show. Go to whatsworkingcam.com and you'll find all the previous shows listed there. That's the web page where the show lives. You can see, as well as the blog that kind of highlights each show. You can find that at cammarston.com. All these things are tied in together. And find me on social media. I try to post as much as I can about upcoming and previous shows and insights that we've had, stuff like that. So find me on social media, Cam Marston, CAMMARSTON on social. And you can email me directly. In fact, Cam, CAM at cammarston.com. So what do we got in store today? If you've listened to my shows in the past, if you're one of the fans that I've got out there, you know I have this, I don't know what it is, sickness for trees. We've had a number of timber people on the show. We've had some sawmill people on the show. We've got, when the explosion of pricing hit the lumber market, we had a hardwood seller on the show. And I find this stuff fascinating. I can't exactly explain why. Perhaps I'm the son of a tree farmer. My father considers himself a farmer of trees, and amongst the many things that he does. And perhaps that's one of the reasons that I've become so fond of it. But I got an email from a listener who had just been in a seminar with Beau Brodbeck. And Beau is an extension specialist out of Auburn University. He lives over on the Eastern Shore in Baldwin County. And he works from, as he says, from Dauphin Island to Decatur, the entire state of Alabama, focusing on urban treescapes. Let me say that again. Urban forests, urban treescapes. And the woman who reached out to me, the listener who said, you need to have this guy on your show, Cam, talked about some of the stuff that Beau was delivering in his workshops, in his seminars. That is a part of his job, is to deliver the information, which is what an extension specialist does out of an ag college. Deliver the information, the research to their constituent base, to the public. And she said, this is so fascinating, and there's so many obvious messages that impact urban treescapes that, particularly in this hurricane-prone part of the world, people need to hear, Cam. So I reached out to him, and he quickly reached back, but I wanted to make sure very clearly. I said, but we got listeners up in the northern part of the state where the hurricanes are greatly diminished by the time they get there. I need to make sure your content is applicable for people in Huntsville, people in Birmingham. And his comment was, man, the number of tornadoes that are beginning to touch down in the northern part of the state, Tornado Alley has moved south and east and is now impacting the state of Alabama. This definitely will have impact to them. So when we come back from break, I'm going to have Beau Brodbeck on with me. It's extension specialist, tree care, tree pruning. We talk a little bit, and we don't get into it as much as we should because I'm creating this intro after our conversation has been recorded. The monetary value that a treescape will add to commercial real estate, the value that a perfect type of trees will add to your home. and it's a significant number, and it's something that we all need to consider when if you're a commercial developer, if you're developing a piece of property, those pretty trees will help the value of your property, and from an energy point, keep the shade on the buildings, which certainly helps the heating and cooling. Anyway, this is good stuff. I think you're going to like it. When we get back from break, Beau Brodbeck, nice guy, really nice guy, and very, very intelligent on the world of trees, and you're in for a treat. Before the break, though, not every financial planner is certified. A CFP, a certified financial planner, is someone who's dedicated themselves to the 4 E's of financial planning: education, examination, experience, and ethics. Both Jamie Sandifer and Mark Salyers are certified financial planners at Sandifer Wealth Management. Check them out at sandiferwealthmanagement.com. Find them online. They're on Old Shell Road here in Mobile. They can help with your financial planning needs wherever you are in the state of Alabama. You'll like them as much as I do. When we come back, Beau Brodbeck, you're listening to What's Working. What's Working is brought to you by the Alabama Center for Real Estate, housed in the Culverhouse College of Business, all housed at the University of Alabama.
Think about how people really see you. The kid at the drive-thru just sees a coffee drinker.
Please pull forward.
Your local barista sees the person who loves a smiley face in their latte.
See you next time.
It's kind of the same way with insurance. Other insurance companies just see a customer, but a State Farm agent sees more. They see you as a neighbor. Your State Farm agent is here to get to know who you really are, so they can help life go right.
Call me, State Farm agent Allison Horner, in Mobile at 666-1616.
We're back. You're listening to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston. What's Working is brought to you by the Alabama Center for Real Estate, housed in the Culverhouse College of Business at the University of Alabama. In the studio with Beau Brodbeck. He was recommended to me by a listener who said, I just got out of his seminar. You need to have him on the show. He sent me a PowerPoint from what he had shown the listener in an event, and I leafed through it very quickly and thought, oh my goodness, this is good stuff. Beau is the extension specialist of urban forestry and arboriculture related to Auburn University. Beau, I'm not going to even try to begin to explain all this. I'm going to ask you to do it. First, thank you for your time and welcome to What's Working.
Absolutely, Cam. It's great to be here.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and what got you into arboriculture.
You know, I've got my degrees in forestry and was hired actually down here on the Gulf Coast back in 2005 in the aftermath of Hurricane Ivan and Katrina to do urban forest recovery. I didn't have a lot of background in urban forestry at the time, but quickly began to pick up using my natural resources background to learn about how we manage trees in cities, and in particularly how we manage trees in relation to storms, whether we're talking about hurricanes on the Gulf Coast or tornadoes in other parts of Alabama.
So the show is, I'm glad you mentioned that. As you know, the show is broadcast across the state. And while I know people along the Gulf Coast love to talk about hurricanes and hurricane damage, those listeners in Huntsville want to find a way to relate to this content too. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, we know on the Gulf Coast we have hurricanes. The intensity and frequency is certainly becoming more and more of an issue, but the same is true for tornadoes. So if you're up further north in the state, if you look at the trends with tornadoes, I mean, they are increasing, they're becoming more prevalent. And so looking at how we manage trees in relation to these storms, and not just the catastrophic stuff, it's the everyday storms too. We get frontline winds on the front of these thunderstorms, which can cause a lot of tree damage.
We all love our trees. There's not a soul out there that says they don't like trees. Even if they're in the tree business, they like trees because the trees are their business. But my impression after going through the PowerPoint that you sent in advance is that most of us are misinformed in the nature of the trees in our environment, particularly in our urban areas. And by the way, urban forester sounds like a conflict of terminology, yet that's what you are. And I want to talk about what are the greatest misnomers? What are the greatest, I guess, what do people not know about trees that they think they know? Let's start there.
Well, you know, going back to your first question about, the urban forest, and it's just that continuation of that gradient. We go from our forest areas to our what we call our wildland urban interface, to, the suburbs. And the forest continues into towns and cities. We just have a lot more gray infrastructure there. But we still have our trees, and we still need those trees. But probably the greatest misconception that we have with people is not understanding tree roots. And that's what gets us in trouble, whether we're talking about tree health or the ability for trees to withstand storms. And that is that 80 to 90% of a tree's root system is located in the top 18 to 20 inches of the soil profile. They're shallow.
Yeah, and that surprised me because for some reason, and perhaps when I was a child in school, I misunderstood this, but I had always understood that each tree had a taproot that went straight down perpendicular to the earth, and it went down as deep as the tree is tall. And it wasn't until flipping through this PowerPoint that I realized, no, that's not true at all.
Yeah, not necessarily. I mean, there's certain species that will have. Longleaf pine does have a taproot. And most trees, as they're developing from young seedlings, have a taproot. But once they start reaching maturity, that taproot flattens out. And most of those roots are right there near the soil surface. That's where the water is. Most trees are not tapping into some deep aquifer. They're needing that moisture coming from rain. That's where the organic content is, decomposing leaf litter, mulch if we're in the urban forest. And it's all up near the soil surface, as well as the one that people forget about. Tree roots need oxygen. And you're not going to find oxygen 6-7 feet down. It's going to be right up there near the soil surface.
I did not know. Here we go. I did not know that a tree root needs oxygen. I thought that the branches and the leaves and the limbs are where the oxygen supply comes from.
Yeah, it's a critical part of what roots need to grow, and so it's a required component. And so when we have, and that's where things get really challenging in the urban environment, because we're normally dealing with terrible soils. We're dealing with compacted soils, and we start limiting how much moisture gets down there, how much oxygen gets down there. And as a result, it's no surprise that our trees oftentimes struggle in urban environments.
So let's take this to the next place. And I want to introduce you to my listener. My typical listener is a 45-year-old, and 70% of the listeners are male. And they have kind of an influencer role in their business. They are the manager, the leader, not exclusively, but they tend to have more influence in the business in which they work than others. And I want to make sure the content that we discuss kind of resonates with them in their own world. So I'm building a building. I'm going to decorate the building. I want it pretty for the customer to come into. I want it pretty for my employees. So I'm going to choose places in a parking lot to plant some trees that will kind of help the aesthetic of the location. Yet what you've told me is the roots of the tree that I'm going to plant are going to be bound by the curb, let's say, are going to be bound by the blacktop, or they're not going to get under the blacktop, or if they do, they're not going to get the moisture or the oxygen that they need. Put me in the head of someone like you that's walking onto a new construction site saying, if you're going to plant trees to accent the look of this place, here's some things you need to consider.
Yeah, and I could probably back it up a little bit more. I mean, there's a whole area we call tree preservation. And so when we look at building construction, there's oftentimes trees on site, and a lot of times people want to keep those trees. They recognize that, we're down here in Mobile, they have a beautiful live oak, but you could be in the northern part of the state, have a beautiful white oak. And recognizing that those trees, are going to increase their property values. They're going to make the site more aesthetically pleasing, the shade, all those values. But we have processes on how to preserve trees during construction, and it's all about preserving that root zone. If you can keep that root zone around that tree from being compacted by having everybody park under the tree, having those roots cut during the construction process. And we have very simple formulas based on tree diameter with a certain radius that you should stay away from that tree if you want to reasonably expect that tree will survive the construction process. And it's not complicated, but it's getting ahead of the construction crews. It takes a lot of forethought to say, these trees are valuable. We want to keep them, and doing your design in relationship, with those trees that you hope to keep. Unfortunately, we oftentimes get the phone call halfway through the construction process when there's cut roots and there's piles of roots in places, and some bells are going off in somebody's head going, we have a problem here. And at that point, we're not doing tree preservation. We're doing mitigation. Yeah. And mitigation is expensive and doesn't always work.
Yeah. So what is the circumference? And does it depend on the species of tree? So I've got a longleaf pine, I've got a live oak, I've got let's pick another one that's fairly common, a crepe myrtle, let's say. They're, accent pieces more than anything. What is the zone which I should protect around the trunk of that tree? Is it the drip line of the branches, or is it, which is what I've always heard, or is it something different?
It's not the drip line. Drip line's not a bad measurement. The issue with it is different species have different shapes, right? Live oak has a huge wide shape. Your pines have much narrower drip lines. So instead, we use a ratio of the tree's diameter at breast height, which is measured 4.5 feet off the ground. And so for each inch at 4.5 feet above the ground, you should have anywhere from about 0.5 to about 1.5 feet in radius. And that is dependent on that species and also the health and maturity of that tree.
Okay, so give me a difference between a pine, a longleaf pine, and let's say a live oak. Now let me repeat this to make sure I'm clear. It's not the circumference of the trunk, it's the height of the trunk.
No. It has to do. There's an old school measurement that we've had in forestry for decades called diameter at breast height.
Diameter at breast height. Okay, here we go.
And that's measured at 4.5 feet.
So we go 4.5 feet up the tree trunk,
and that's where we take our
and measure
diameter.
The diameter. Yeah.
And so for every inch in diameter, for something like a pine that's in good health, not what we would term overmature, meaning it's kind of maybe reaching the end of its lifespan, probably something like 1 foot for every inch would be your radius. Mm-hmm. A live oak, if it's a relatively young live oak, maybe it's 25 years old, it's vigorously growing, we can probably take that measurement down to 0.5 feet for every inch in diameter. Mm-hmm. Now, if it's something like a beech tree, beech trees, especially one that's mature, are very sensitive to construction damage. We might want to push that radius to 1.5 feet.
Yeah.
And so there's a little bit of wiggle room there, but it's really dependent on that species, the maturity of that species. The younger, the easier they are to preserve. Once they become huge trees, they need a lot more roots, a lot more real estate to mine to be successful.
Now, and let me ask you, is this part of your work, is to go onto these construction sites and say, this is this tree and this is the height at breast height or the diameter at breast height, therefore we're going to stake off this around the trunk of the tree?
No, not necessarily. Working in extension with Auburn University, more my role is on education and outreach efforts. So we do write publications on these topics. I do a lot of lectures for municipalities. We do seminars, workshops for tree care professionals, making sure people are aware of the latest research as it relates to these various topics in urban forestry. Things are constantly changing over time, and we have to be able to adjust and make sure people know what the latest. Pruning paints is the classic example. For decades, we recommended, putting a pruning paint on your tree trunk. For the last 30 years, we haven't, and it's because new research has emerged. And so, my job is to provide that education, that outreach, being the connection between research and the public on tree care management.
So pruning paint, here I've learned something again. Pruning paint is on the outs.
It's on the outs. It's probably for at least 30 years, unless you are in Texas and in areas where we have oak wilt, but we don't have it in Alabama, thank goodness. We don't do any type of pruning paint. It locks in moisture. It's going to increase decay. It's going to slow that healing process in the tree, and that's what research does.
Yeah.
Research kind of illuminates these areas that we knew were problematic. And that's where my role comes in, helping translate that research into a format that people can understand and apply, whether it's a municipality, a professional, or a homeowner.
Yeah, well, this is fascinating. I love the topic. Always have been a big tree fan. I told you a little bit about the sand live oak in the yard next to our house, which we have named the Old Man. And we've got another live oak that my son and I planted 12 years ago, that we named Jimmy. And Jimmy is huge now. It's amazing how quickly those trees grow, which is something I want to address after the break. The myth that live oaks grow slow. I've got evidence in my front yard that is indeed a myth. Beau Brodbeck is the extension specialist with urban forestry and arboriculture, Auburn University 100% extension appointment. And he's based in Fairhope. He was introduced to me by someone in one of his seminars. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the myth of the live oak as well as the reason trees fall during storms. You're listening to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston. What's Working is brought to you by the Alabama Center for Real Estate, housed in the Culverhouse College of Business, University of Alabama.
This is Trey Langus with Transworld Business Advisors. I help business owners sell their businesses from mom and pop size to large mergers and acquisitions. We have a huge buyer database looking for quality businesses to buy right now. Confidentiality guaranteed. If you're a business owner considering an exit within the next few years, let's talk. Again, I'm Trey Langus. Find me at Transworld Business Advisors or Google my name.
Customer service never goes out of style. In fact, I think it's safe to say that customer service is more valuable and more important now more than ever. Hi, this is Cam Marston. One thing that my over 200 episodes of What's Working has taught me is how important customer service is to building and maintaining a thriving business. It's the growing need for customer service that's led me to partner with one of the state's leading customer service trainers to create our program called Delivering 5-Star Customer Service. Your team will get one 90-minute training session per month for 6 consecutive months. Each session builds on the skills learned the previous month, allowing your customer-facing teams to practice before moving on to the next lesson. And the 6 lessons address everything from appearance to electronic communications to conflict resolution to maintaining a service mindset. Our program travels and is delivered in person at your workplace, nothing virtual. You simply can't practice the level of the skills this course teaches virtually. For more information, email me, cam@cammarston.com, and let's schedule a time to talk. Remember, you have less to fear from outside competition than you do from discourtesy and bad service from inside your own company. Again, email me, cam@cammarston.com, and let's talk about your business. We're back. You're listening to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston in the studio today with Beau Brodbeck. Beau, it's a tongue twister sometimes in speaking your name. What's Working is brought to you by the Alabama Center for Real Estate at the Culverhouse College of Business at the University of Alabama. Beau is an extension specialist with urban forestry and arboriculture. And Beau, prior to the break, we were talking about a little bit about live oaks, which I think people in our part of the world are rightly very proud of. They're just a beautiful tree. And when people who aren't from this part of the world come down and see the live oaks, and I think of Government Street right now, and those beautiful oaks that shade that street and the canopy, the myth is that the live oak is a slow-growing tree. I was raised being told that oaks grow slow. However, my youngest son and I planted one when we moved into our house. It was just a little bit taller than he was, and he was 2 or 3 years old. It's now 40, 50 feet tall, I bet. And we're having to trim it back because it's gotten so big. Let's talk about the myth of the growth speed of the live oak.
Yeah, that is a common misconception, that live oak, and I think it's partially because they grow so large and they stick around for such a long time. It's a very long-lived species. They can live for hundreds of years, and so I think people see them at their maturity and think it must take a long time to get there. And I think the other myth that goes with that is that we look at some of these trees and we think they're hundreds of years old. I hear people all the time, this tree must be 500 years old.
Columbus slept in this tree or something like that.
Absolutely. And so, certain president gave a speech under this tree. And they can certainly live that long, but they grow. I would put them not in the fast category, but probably squarely in a medium growth category where they can, if they have the right soil environment, the right moisture environment, they're going to do exceedingly well. And they have just wonderful wood characteristics that also give them the longevity we're looking for. They don't have a lot of decay problems. They have great branch structures, and they're just a wonderful tree down here on the Gulf Coast, whether we're talking from, East Texas all the way up through Virginia. They're kind of a coastal plain species.
I love them, and I would think that if I'm building a home or building a business and want to accent the business with some trees, a live oak is maybe a good species. Because another thing I've always heard, and you can tell me whether this is true or not, when a storm comes through, it may strip every leaf off of that live oak, but it won't push it over. And the same is true with a magnolia tree. It'll strip every leaf, but it won't push it over. So if I'm building a business and I want to accent it with a tree or a home, plant one of those two because it's not going to blow over on your building. What do you think?
No, absolutely. There was some research that was done initially out of the University of Florida starting in the late 90s through the mid-2000s, looking at which trees withstand high wind environments. And two of the top tree species, one of them was live oak, and the other one you mentioned was southern magnolia.
Right.
As you noted, the live oak, and this is really more anecdotal, it has a tendency when the wind speeds start to pick up to start losing most of its foliage and its smaller limbs, maybe an inch in diameter. And so it loses a lot of what we term its wind sail. And so you're left with these large structural limbs. And so after some of these major storms, the trees look dead, but give them time.
Right.
They will resprout. Magnolia is different. It actually holds on to almost all of its leaves, and it tends to be more of a flexible tree, and it just kind of tends to mold with the wind is what the research showed. It's what we term its biomechanics. Move a little bit different, and it's a fascinating tree, and it's one that when we saw the data, I couldn't believe that it was a wind resilient tree. You wouldn't think at it, looking at it. But it's listed as one of the tops, and my anecdotal observations of living on the Gulf Coast now since 2005 is, absolutely it does exceedingly well.
It drops leaves all the time. It's almost tropical in that nature. In my opinion, it drops leaves all the time. You plant them somewhere where you don't have a yard underneath them, or you're going to be raking leaves for the rest of your life.
Yeah, it's one of those style things with magnolias. I tell people if you have a larger yard, let those limbs grow down to the ground. They'll contain their own mess, because that's the complaint I get from magnolias, that the leaves are difficult to rake up. They're a much thicker leaf, so they persist a lot longer. They don't decompose quite as quickly. But if you can let those limbs go straight down to the ground, they almost look like huge Christmas trees, tropical-looking Christmas trees. You can rake those leaves right up underneath it. And you also have a tree that does exceedingly well when we have these storms blow through.
Yeah, and kids can climb a magnolia. They're a great climbing tree. I remember looking up in one of the magnolias in our neighborhood and seeing a speck of a child so high up in that tree and going, oh my Lord, just come down one branch at a time, please, intentionally, and don't fall down. So one of the things I talked about prior to the break is what makes a tree fall down during storms. And of course, everyone is saying, well, wind. But there's got to be more than that. We've talked about the shallow roots. We've talked about the impediments that concrete and barriers can do to it. The obvious answer is not wind. What makes a tree come down during a storm?
It's never one factor. It's usually a combination of multiple factors that make a tree that will fail during storms. And a lot of it starts with past injury. So if we have trees that have maybe been planted too close to the curb, too close to a driveway, to a house foundation, and you've had to damage that root system because of maybe it's buckling your sidewalk, it's buckling your driveway, you have that root concrete, and the solution oftentimes for people is I'm just going to cut those roots away. You are cutting away the stability of that tree. I love there's an old analogy of putting a wine glass on a dinner plate. And if you can imagine, the wine glass is the tree, and the dinner plate is the extent of the root system. When you start cutting away parts of that dinner plate, you're taking away the biological capacity for that tree to absorb water, dissolve minerals, and growth. So you might see decreases in growth. When you start getting closer and start shaving away part of the base of that wine glass, you're now cutting into what we call the structural root plate. And that is the portion of the tree, just like a wine glass, that helps it stand. And so when we have those trees that are planted too close to gray infrastructure, and then we start damaging it just through maintenance of our cities, of our landscapes, we really increase the risk for those trees to fail. And so that's probably one of the big ones. And then, with that is having the wrong trees out there. We know that there's certain species that do well in high wind environments. Down here in the Gulf Coast, yellow poplar, wonderful tree, not for wind.
Right.
They have a weak wood structure. They grow exceedingly fast. And as a result, they just don't do well. The tops blow out of them time and time again. It's something you might want to plant a little bit further north in Alabama.
So if I'm I'm thinking about a specific pine tree, a longleaf pine in our yard, and I'm wondering, we did cut some roots as we were putting in a porch. Is there any evidence given by the tree that it's damaged? Because the pine looks just fine now. Is there any, can I look up into the canopy and say, oh, the root system that we cut is going to come back and haunt us?
Yeah, absolutely. Trees die from their outside tips back towards their center. So if you think about they have to get moisture and water all the way up to the furthest extremities. And when we start damaging that root system, the first evidence you'll see of problematic is first, the canopy is going to thin a little bit, usually towards the top of the tree and the outer extremities of those branches. You might see the foliage start to turn a little yellow. And these can be subtle hints. But then the more dramatic hints is you'll start to see dead branches at the top of the tree and at the ends of your branches. Don't worry about dead branches on the inside. It's those ones on the outside that warning bells should be going off of, there's something going on with my roots. Did I cut the roots? Is it maybe a lack of fertility? What's going on here? And so pay attention to those trees. And I like to tell people, you should be evaluating your trees at least once a year because there's things we can do for preventative maintenance rather than letting the storms take the trees down. Let's begin that. And I think we're going to need to pick up preventative maintenance when we come back from break, but trimming the trees. Like I said, I've got that live oak, the old man, and I love to keep the canopy about 6-7 feet off the ground, but not let it touch the ground so that I can get under it, frankly, walk under it, mow under it, stuff like that. When I'm trimming a tree, shaping it, what do I need to keep in mind? So, that's a big area when we talk about tree pruning, but some of the concepts are you should always prune back to if you have a limb that's extending, maybe touching your roof, you should always trim that limb back to a smaller lateral limb. Preferably a limb that's a third of the diameter of the one you're removing. You don't want to just do a heading cut, which just means you're just going to lop it off at any discriminate point. That increases a flush of growth. Think of your crepe myrtles when you top out your crepe myrtles, right? You get that flush. And the problem with that is you get uncontrolled growth, and as that stuff gets bigger, a lot of times it's not well attached to the tree. Also, most trees, if they're young, you can take out as much as 20 to 25% of the canopy in a given year. As they get older, as we start looking at our large oaks, our large hardwoods, you probably want to keep that around 10% or less. It's kind of like people. As we age, we don't deal with any kind of health issues as well. And when we're pruning trees, it's a controlled wound. We are wounding that tree. It's controlled. It's got a purpose, but we just have to be very careful of where we do it. And then the last thing I'll leave as it relates to that is making sure you're making the smallest pruning cut possible. If you need to remove a limb, a lot of times it's better to reduce that length rather than take it all the way back to the main trunk where you might be creating a wound that's 8, 10, 12 inches in diameter because it's going to take that tree a long time to seal it over. Trees don't heal, they seal. And so that sealing process, if it's huge, doesn't happen in a season or two. It can take it a decade. And then you have this race with decay and pests that are trying to get to the inside of that tree. And we end up damaging the future structure and health of that tree. So keeping those pruning cuts as small as possible. This is fascinating. I can't get enough of this. Beau Brodbeck, Extension Specialist, Urban Forestry and Arboriculture with Auburn University, based in Fairhope, works from Decatur to Dauphin Island. When we come back from break, I want to talk more about the tree world, what we don't know. And it would seem to me that the more mass we keep in the top of the tree as we trim it, the greater it's at risk of getting blown down. You keep the mass lower and the wind's going to blow over it. You keep it up top, it's like a mushroom that's going to blow down. Anyway, we'll talk about that theory when we come back. You're listening to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston in the studio today. What's Working is brought to you by the Alabama Center for Real Estate at the Culver House College of Business, all housed at the University of Alabama.
When you make the right decision, it feels good, like picking the perfect accent rug or choosing a good night's sleep over an all-night crime show binge. It feels really good to make the right insurance decision, too. I'm State Farm agent Allison Horner, and that's why I'm right here in Mobile to help you select the right protection at the right price. I'll make sure you understand your State Farm coverages so you'll know what to expect if the unexpected happens. With me as your State Farm agent, it's easy to make the right choice. You can come by, call, or click AllisonHorner.com. When you want the real deal, like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
This is Bill Wasden, labor and employment attorney at Burr Forman. With offices across Alabama, our attorneys are keenly aware of employment situations in a state with under 3% unemployment. Employers have faced many obstacles over the last 2 years, and new processes and policies must be in place to ensure you're setting clear expectations for your employees. We've created a list of the top 5 legal and operating issues facing employers in 2022 that will, ultimately, ensure your company is prepared for a data breach, the Great Resignation, new presidential executive orders, or potential overtime rule changes. Reach out to me at bwasden@burr.com, that's BURR.com, or my partner Katie Willis, kwillis@burr.com, for this information. Burr attorneys are here to help you with your labor and employment law needs.
No representation is made that the quality of the legal services to be performed is greater than the quality of legal services performed by other lawyers. We're back. I'm in the studio today with Beau Brodbeck, Extension Specialist in Urban Forestry and Arboriculture, Auburn University, based in Fairhope, Alabama. He was referred to me by a listener who sat through one of his seminars over in Fairhope, I think it was, and she reached out and said, "Hey, Cam, you need to have this guy on the show." I looked through the PowerPoint that he sent after I got in touch with him and was absolutely smitten. I think this topic, we could do weeks and weeks on this topic. Beau, let's talk a little bit about the way to manage these trees in terms of shaping them, or let's talk about, and I see this going on a lot in Baldwin County right now, which is moving into a forested area to create a subdivision. And they're picking and choosing which trees to cut and which to keep. And what are the implications of that?
Yeah, as it relates to the trees' resilience to wind, there's the factor of where the canopy and the distribution of the canopy is really, really important. If you think about how trees naturally grow in forest settings, they have lots of other trees around them, and there is a competition for light. So what you have is you have trees that grow straight up very, very quickly. Their canopies develop really high up in those trees. And they also develop tall, kind of more, if we want to say spindly trunks on those specimens. Those trees do fine in storms as long as they have those other trees around them to help buffer them from the wind. Where we get into trouble with those trees is when we come in for, like as you mentioned, a new development's coming in and we start thinning it open. So we're thinning it out to be able to plant homes and driveways and streets and whatever's going on there. And suddenly we remove a lot of those trees that used to be there. But the trees still developed that canopy really high, that tall, thin trunk. And we get into some issues with the biomechanics of trees. Trees tend to bend, the trunks tend to bend halfway between the roots and the average base of the canopy. And so when that canopy is really high, they're bending at a much thinner part in that trunk. And that's why a lot of times when we've had a recently open forest, they snap. Well, if you look at loblollies, we've been talking about pines, they slap 16, 20 feet up. And that's that halfway point that we see in our storms, as opposed to a tree that's always grown in an open environment, it's going to develop a canopy much lower on that tree.
Right.
So that bending moment happens much closer to the ground. It's a much thicker trunk, a stouter trunk, and we don't have those issues. And so be very careful with those sites where if you're in a new subdevelopment, they've opened up that forest, you see these tall, spindly trees with the canopies up high, warning bells ought to be going off in your head.
So part of your work is research. Part of your work is bringing the research to the public. What are you doing right now? Where is your research taking you right now? What are you finding fascinating in your work?
Well, as it relates to my research, we have a project right now looking at the motivations and barriers to certification and professional tree care work. And so it's a whole different topic that we can talk about.
But we talked about this on the phone and prior to this, and that is the rare and value, the rare person who is a certified is the term
arborist.
Arborist. And they're hard to find, aren't they?
In certain parts of the state, they are. Down here on the Gulf Coast, we have quite a large number of commercial tree care companies that are owned or operated by a certified arborist or have a certified arborist on staff. But you reach in certain parts of the state, in the Dothan area, we don't have many. In the Auburn area, we don't have a lot. Montgomery doesn't have a lot. And, if you're going to have your trees evaluated and managed, you really should have a certified arborist on staff. And so some of the research I've been working on is looking at how do we get more of these commercial tree care companies to take that step towards certification. It does take a certain number of years in the industry. You have to pass an exam that shows competence in the latest standards that are backed by research in tree care. And so it does take, it's a fairly rigorous process. But we're seeing issues, and I think one of the biggest issues that we are seeing is a lack of economic incentive for a lot of these companies, and that's driven because the public, I don't think, is aware of who a certified arborist is and what they bring.
Well, let's make a distinction here. There are tree companies, let's say in our part of the world, that have thousands of acres of pine trees. They probably don't have a certified arborist on staff. They don't need them. I'm guessing a certified arborist is somebody that's at a tree company that's working in and around the neighborhoods in the city who are taking down trees, problem trees, and stuff like that. Tell me how the consumer, the homeowner, the business owner would use a certified arborist. What value does it provide to them?
Sure. So you mentioned, the forested areas. So once we get outside of towns and cities, we're talking about forests, and we have licensed foresters that think about managing forest systems. But when we start moving into our urban areas, our backyards, that's where these certified arborists. Now, there's tons of tree care companies out there with people with a bucket truck and a chainsaw, and they can do removals. Just make sure that they're bonded and insured before you have them work on your property. But they don't always have the knowledge and skills on understanding tree biomechanics, understanding how trees heal and seal with wounds, understanding some of the emerging research on tree care. And so when we care about our trees and we're thinking about pruning that tree because we want to keep it for another 20 to 30 years, when we're thinking about planting a tree, what species should I plant? That's where the certified arborist comes in. You've got somebody that has some knowledge. They have to, with part of that credential, keep up with continuing education credits. And that's kind of where I come into play. I do a lot of those workshops and classes so that they are well informed and they can pass that management down to their clients, so that we have trees that are well maintained. I see poor tree care work done all the time, and one of the problems is it dramatically shortens the lifespan of trees. If you go in there and incorrectly prune a tree, take your favorite tree, the live oak, we go in there and make those large diameter pruning cuts. We cut the tree in the wrong place. Maybe we cut too much canopy out. We can stress that tree. We can have insects attack that tree. We can have infestations from decay, and the tree might be gone in 10 years, as opposed to having it done properly, and the tree could be here. Live oak, it could be here for another century.
Yeah.
And so, that's really one of my concerns, is making sure that we understand that when we're hiring, we need to hire the right people who can make sure we're making the right management decisions. And certification, the arborist certifications, is one of the few credentials we really have to differentiate those two groups.
So you're a big advocate of anybody listening, picking up the phone and saying to a tree care company, do you have a certified arborist on staff that can come evaluate what I need to do here?
Absolutely. I tell people all the time, if you've made the decision to remove the tree, there's no question in your mind, just make sure they're insured and bonded. But if you're wanting advice on that tree, if you're looking to keep that tree for years or decades in the future, ask if they have a certified arborist on tap. You can also go to a website, treesaregood.org. And do the Find an Arborist tab. Type in your country. It is the International Society of Arboriculture that administers that program, your state and your city, and it'll do a drop-down list of companies that have a certified arborist.
What do you think the international, what was the association?
International Society of Arboriculture.
When they have a convention, are they rocking it out? A whole convention center full of arborists?
Absolutely. It's going on this year. This year it is the international, so it'll be in Sweden. And they're going to have arborists from all over the world with, a combination of researchers, practitioners, and the practitioners move from, people that manage trees for municipalities, which is a different job than commercial tree care companies, from utility tree care companies, right? And they have, huge conventions with, emerging research, the things they have to understand, emerging ways to, manage different types of diseases and pests, which is, it's always a growing challenge as we're living in a more globalized economy. And so they're being armed with that information that they then pass on to their clients, whether it's through a municipal job or a commercial person you hire on your property.
Is there a municipality within striking distance of here that people listening may know of who have done a really good job managing their urban forests?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's two that come immediately to mind down here on the Gulf Coast. City of Mobile, where we're sitting now, has a great urban forestry program. They have a certified arborist on staff that is leading that program, Peter Toller, and he does a wonderful job. They've really kind of revamped their ordinances, making sure they protect those trees from some of that construction damage. They've recognized the link between damage to root systems and failure after storms. And so they've started to change some of their ordinances to be able to reflect that and have penalties for removing trees that cause value for the entire city. And so another one would be the city of Fairhope over on Matt. They've really done a great job maintaining that resource. We always think about planting trees, and that's certainly a way to go, but it's more efficient to maintain what you have. And if we're efficient, because we maintain those large, older trees, which can take us decades, if not centuries, to get back.
Yeah.
And so it's those two municipalities have done a really wonderful job.
It's amazing. It seems to be a constant theme of we're trying to revitalize our cities. We're trying to maintain our downtowns after having left, neglected and abandoned them. Certainly Mobile is. We're trying to revitalize our trees, and after having neglected, and we seem to spend an extraordinary amount of time trying to fix what we thought we were doing, which was the right thing. And if we knew what we were doing on the outset, it never would have been an issue. That's perhaps me on a soapbox. But how can people find you? If they want more information, they want you to come deliver a presentation to their group, how do they find you?
If you just, probably Google my name, I'll come up. I do a lot of workshops, seminars, but the easiest way is go to aces.edu. That's the Alabama Cooperative Extension System. And so aces.edu, and just get on the directory and type in Brodbeck, and you should be able to pull me up no problem. And I'm happy to give lectures to municipal groups, homeowner groups, on urban tree care management topics.
This PowerPoint that I'm holding here that he had sent me is 67 slides long, folks. There's no lack of content in here, and we've just touched a fraction of it, and I think it's fascinating. Beau, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
You're listening to It's Working. We'll come back after this break. And by the way, I'll put a link to Beau's contact information in the podcast notes if you want to get the podcast. You're listening to What's Working. We'll be back after this break with segment 5. What's Working is brought to you by the Alabama Center for Real Estate, housed in the Culver House College of Business at the University of Alabama.
This is Trey Langus with Transworld Business Advisors. You've worked for years to grow and build your business, and now you're considering an exit strategy. Selling your business can be intimidating and complex. Let our local team at Transworld Business Advisors help you. We are the largest business brokerage in the world, and I will personally and confidentially guide you through this process. I'm Trey Langus. Find me at Transworld Business Advisors or Google my name.
Special thanks to Beau Brodbeck. Beau, I'm grateful for your time, sharing your knowledge. Folks, he's available for seminars, workshops. He told you how to reach out for him. Find him online, Auburn Extension Specialists in Fairhope area. And He puts on a good show. I've heard this from some of the people that are in his workshops, his seminars. Well worth the time. We're back. You're listening to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston. What's Working is brought to you by the Alabama Center for Real Estate, housed in the Culverhouse College Business, all housed at the University of Alabama. Again, special thanks to Beau. And I was delighted, frankly, to hear him dispel the myth of the slow-growing live oak. I mean, of all the important things in the world, dispelling the myth of the slow-growing live oak is not near the top. Nevertheless, as a guy who's looked at these trees since a child, has lived under and around these trees since a child, I've always wondered, can they really be that old? Do they really grow that slow? And I'll never forget the day my son, his name is Mac and I'm guessing he wasn't much more than 2 or 3 years old, maybe even younger than that. I put him in the car on a Saturday morning and I drove to a nursery and I had him pick out the live oak. We lined them up, or found them lined up. And I said, which one do you want, Mac? And he pointed at one and we put it in the back of the car. And he and I planted it that day. And I wish I had taken a picture of him standing next to the tree the day that we planted it. Well, if you were to see it today, Mac is now 15. So that was like 12, 13 years ago. If you'd see it today, you'd realize the myth of the slow growing live oak. It's huge. And like I said, in the show, I told Mac when we planted it, when he was just a young boy, hey, what do you want to name this tree? He said, I want to name him Jimmy. And we call him Jimmy. Everybody in the house knows who we're talking about. We need to go trim the leaves or trim the branches off of Jimmy. We need to take care of Jimmy. Somebody go put some water down, or Jimmy doesn't need any more water these days. He's quite self-sufficient these days. But it's amazing how quickly it's grown. And every year I trim more limbs off of it because it's getting in the way of scratching the car as we come in and out of the driveway. Anyway, the myth of the slow-growing live oak, I've seen it in person. So, again, Beau Brodbeck, good guy to know, good guy to have at the dial. Go find yourself an arborist, a certified arborist, and utilize their expertise. They're hard to find. As Beau said, they're out there, and we need more of them. They'll help you keep those beautiful trees in your yard, next to your business, whatever it may be. We got some new advertisers coming on, and I'm glad to say that. We are looking into expanding the show into yet another Alabama market, kind of kicking those things around, trying to figure out where the next best place to go would be, or receiving calls from people who say, I've heard about your show and your Alabama-wide footprint, and I'd be interested in advertising and getting my business name in these different corners of the state. And I'm thinking, golly, this side hustle that I created in 2018 is beginning to look more and more legitimate, I guess is the word to say. It's both wonderful and surprising, and I love every part of it. Keep an ear out as we continue to bring changes to the show. We've got a new partnership in the works. I can't say too much about it because the details aren't really yet ironed out, but a partnership with a credible organization, a very credible organization, 30 years old media company in the state of Alabama. Anyway, all looking very good. I'm grateful for the success that we're having here. Let's go close it down. I want to remind you how to find the show. And you know what I did the other day is went online and looked at the show reviews via Apple Podcasts. And I hadn't looked at these things in a long while. I try not to concern myself with this stuff, but I took a look. And number one, there were more reviews than I had anticipated. And number two, they were largely very positive. And I don't mean to sound surprised when I say that, but they were largely very positive. And so if you're listening and you're one of those people who have reviewed the show that way, thank you. If you want to and add to the list of reviews, go to Apple Podcasts, enter my name there. You'll find the 2 podcasts that I do. This one is What's Working with Cam Marston, obviously, and let the world know what you think. I'd be grateful if you did. And if you subscribed as well, I'd be grateful. Good stuff. You can find me all over social media, Cam Marston. It's now an integral part of the marketing world in which I live. Go check it out. Subscribe, follow, post, paste, pin, tweet, whatever it may be. And you can find me at cammarston.com. You can see the full scope of the work that we do, as well as find the podcasts. What'sworkingcam.com is a part of that page. You can check those podcasts out and get all the inventory. Hope you will. Thank you again for listening. Let us know what you think. Cam@cammarston.com. John Thompson with Ion Digital produces the show. Always grateful for John. You're listening to What's Working, brought to you by the Alabama Center for Real Estate. We'll have another show next week. Have a good week, everybody.